panel has been set up to make sure that anyone can observe our democratic meetings. Please therefore remember that this meeting could be watched anywhere at any time by anyone with access to the internet. There is a slight delay between the meeting and the broadcast of around 30 seconds. Webcast officer, could you please commence the broadcast and confirm?
Yep, that's live now.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Community Development Group. Before we commence with the proceedings, I can confirm that the Council has adopted some basic etiquette rules for its remote meetings. For ease, these are as follows. Only speak when the Chairman invites you to do so. Please let the Chairman know when you wish to speak through the chat function. The Chairman will introduce speakers in the order that the request to speak was made, unless there is a point of order which will be prioritised. Please minimise all distractions while you are in the meeting. Members are asked to mute your microphones when not speaking and consider turning off your video to reduce interference on the audio feed. Please bear in mind there may be a lag between speaking and other attendees hearing you. Presentations, images or video footage should have been made available to you in advance of the meeting and will be visible on screen. Please indicate via the chat function if there is a problem. When referring to reports, please quote the page number and paragraph number. There is no private business for this evening. However, members are reminded that it is their responsibility to make sure that their venue and connection is private. If you do lose connection at any point and are unable to immediately rejoin, then please call the meeting facilitator. Contact details have been provided. Please only use the chat function for the purpose prescribed for requesting to speak or for a point of order. The chat function is subject to the Access of Information Regimes, FOI/EIR, and is also subject to data protection, rules of defamation, and the Council's Code of Conduct. For this meeting, the councillors are identified by a prefix of CLLR before their name. There are officers in attendance, and they are identified with the prefix of officer. There is a minute taker for this meeting and one meeting facilitator. We have received apologies from Councillor Mrs. Dervish, but I can confirm that this meeting is quorate. The Community Development Group consists of the following members: Councillors Mrs. Dervish, Mrs. Garrett, Hensman, Mrs. Parker, Mrs. Pell, Mrs. Waters, Miss Weeks, Mrs. Wilson, and Councillor Wright. The officers for this meeting are Emma Wisby, Governance and Members Manager, and Alison Webb, Governance and Member Officer. My name is Chloe Waite, and I will be the meeting facilitator for this meeting. I will now hand over to the Chairman, Councillor Mrs. Garrett. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chloe. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start by welcoming you all to this virtual meeting of the Community Development Group. My name is Councillor Mrs. Garrett, and I'll be chairing this meeting. I'm being assisted by a Governance Officer and Meeting Facilitator who will help me to identify when people want to speak and manage the notifications through the chat function. I obviously can't see all of you, so please let me know using the chat function if there are any issues with your internet connection. Please also remember to mute your microphone when you finish speaking. Members, for this meeting, when I seek your agreement, silence will be taken as assent. As the meeting facilitator has confirmed the attendance of members and officers, I shall now proceed with the business of the meeting. So, agenda item 1, apologies for absence. I understand that we've got Councillor Mrs. Dervish who's given her apologies. Is that correct?
Yes, Chairman, that is correct.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I can confirm that's correct.
And if there are no more apologies, I'll proceed to item 2, declarations of interest. So do members have any disclosable pecuniary interests, other pecuniary interests, or non-pecuniary interest that they may wish to declare for this evening? Please state the item and the nature of your interest. Please indicate when you wish to speak in the chat function. Councillor Mrs. Pell, did you have your hand up then?
Yes, Madam Chairman. I've also put it on the chat, but it wasn't going through quick enough. I just need some clarification on declarations of interest. I am a member of the Braintree Cycling Group that has been set up.
Chairman, I can advise that that interest would not prevent you from taking part in this scrutiny review. That is an appointment by this authority in your capacity as a councillor. But where if the scrutiny review examines the work of that group, then there's something that we will advise on a case-by-case basis. But it shouldn't hinder you in your participation in future, but it certainly doesn't prevent you from taking participation in this evening's meeting.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emma. Right, if there are no further declarations, I will proceed to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Members, for this item, I'll be seeking your agreement. Therefore, silence will be assent. However, if a member wishes to raise an issue in respect of the minutes, please indicate via the chat function. Do any members have any objection to the approval of the minutes as an accurate record of the meeting held on the 28th of October 2020? Thank you, members. Your silence is agreement that the minutes are an accurate record. So we will now proceed to agenda item 4, public question time. Members, there are no registered speakers for this evening's public question time, so I will proceed straight away to item number 5, cycling and walking in the Braintree district, an introduction to the terms of reference and future work for the programme of 21-22. Members, this report is set out on pages 5 to 14 of the agenda. Please, can I ask Emma Wisby, Governance and Members Manager, to set out the report?
Thank you, Chairman. Members, this is the first report of your scrutiny review, and the purpose of the report is to introduce you into the subject. And what we are seeking tonight is members' agreements to the terms of reference, which is set out in the agenda Appendix 2, and also to note the work programme. In addition to these 2 formal decisions, we're also going to be asking members for their thoughts around how we progress this scrutiny review into this topic. So, Chairman, I won't take members through the history of how this topic came forward for selection, as that's very well documented in the committee report. But just quickly to say that this was a topic that was put forward by Councillor Garrett through the call for topics last year. There is a slight delay in the development of this scrutiny programme purely because of the impact of COVID-19 on the authorities' meetings last year. So we are a little bit behind our timescales, and I'll pick up on that later on in the report. So as I said, the topic come through the selection process. It has been considered by the 4 scrutiny chairmen alongside other topics, and it's also been considered by the management board of the organisation. So going through those process, this subject of cycling and walking has been allocated to the community development group, this scrutiny group. As set out on page 8 of the report, there is some background to this topic which was put forward by Councillor Garrett as to why it was a worthy topic to come forward to be examined by a scrutiny committee. And the report sets out some key elements of those considerations, which was basically to a review into the subject could help to identify what information advice was being relayed to local residents by the council, what provisions the council has in place in order to support new adventures to meet government objectives, and a view to understanding the perceived barriers that are affecting walking and cycling. As a result of the consideration of the topic by Management Board and the scrutiny chairman, terms of reference have been worked up for this scrutiny review, which are set out on, sorry, it's Appendix 1, it's not Appendix 2, I do apologise, which is page 10 of the report. So taking the original concept of the topic submitted by Councillor Garrett, there's 3 bullet points to the scrutiny review, which members have had sight of. This is the lens at which we will look at the topic of cycling and walking in the Braintree district. The only sort of word of caution that I would give here is the same caution that I give on each of these reviews is that the terms of reference are there as a framework. We believe they are flexible or provide the flexibility for members to examine this topic. And we've actually identified that there's two limbs within this topic of walking and cycling, one for a leisure perspective and also the commuting perspective. Now, we have previously looked at highways and the rights of way network under scrutiny reviews, and this is not an opportunity to re-examine those reviews. This is a review in its own right into those topics. So we wouldn't want to stray into matters that have gone previously. If I can just turn members' attention to the terms of reference which we are asking you to adopt today. As I say, there's three key points and there's a note which we need to draw your attention to. So the first part is, what is the perceived barriers to increasing cycling and walking provision for local residents and communities in the district? Limitations, for example, costs, looking at the e-scooter projects results. The second point is, what action is currently being undertaken by the council in order to link in the government's new cycling and walking initiative, Gear Change, as well as other local authority initiatives. An example there is to look at the Dutch roundabout, which I believe is the second Dutch roundabout to be implemented in the country, with Cambridge being the first, and I believe that Sheffield is on project to have the third. What policies criteria does the council currently have in place in relation to cycling, walking, and is there a need for the council to improve its policies to further support the provision of cycling and walking in the district? For example, planning policies, local plan policies regarding pedestrianisation and cycling. So as you can see within those terms of reference, it is a very broad scrutiny review that you can undertake with this subject. And what we have already done as officers at Appendix 2 is already give you some of the resources which are in the public domain, mainly through the County Council's website, regarding cycling and walking initiatives. They do cover everything from the current networks through to the press releases on the Dutch roundabout. So we've given that to members as a starting point for you to conduct your scrutiny review. The word of caution that we have on this scrutiny review is that we do have the climate change working group who are working on similar topics as to your own. Now, the difference between yourselves and that group is that you are scrutinising the authority, which may mean that you will look at the work of the climate change group is undertaking. So you are not. So there'll be probably opportunities where you're working along side by side, but you are not to undertake work for that group. Or they to undertake work for you. So we will help you to manage that relationship going forward. Within the terms of reference, we've also given you suggested key contacts for lead officers for this matter. And we've actually identified Councillor Frankie Ritchie, the Cabinet Member for Communities, Culture and Tourism. And it may be that we also identify other Cabinet members to come forward to give you evidence as part of your scrutiny review. So, Chairman, at this point, can I pause to see if any members have got any questions about the terms of reference, whether there's any queries that we can just deal with at the moment before we move on to the next part?
Councillor Mrs. Pell.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just really need some clarification as to how this fits in with the cycling strategy group that has been formed, which is, we've had 2 meetings so far, which is chaired by Frankie. How this will fit into that, I'm just a little bit concerned that we are duplicating some of the work.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Pell. Okay, so I take you back to the point of this committee. It is a scrutiny committee. You are not a committee who undertakes a piece of project work on behalf of the organisation. What you are doing is examining the the organisations. So with that particular cycling group, you can actually look at the work that it's doing within the terms of the reference of this scrutiny review. So the documentation for that committee working group would be available to scrutiny members. And it may be, as looking at the terms of reference for this scrutiny review, you decide actually you would like a representative of that group to come to this scrutiny committee to explain their role, what they're currently looking at, because it is quite possible that you will look at what they're doing, their terms of reference in the context of this scrutiny review, and make a series of recommendations to the executive, because when you've conducted your scrutiny review, it should result in a set of recommendations to the executive, which they will then consider and respond back to. Now, it's entirely possible that within your scrutiny review recommendations, through your evidence gathering and listening to witnesses who could be members of that group or officers, that you may make a recommendation to the executive around that group, its terms of reference, its longevity, whether it's exploring what it needs to, whether it needs to sort of look at some particular policy areas, how that is then utilised within the organisation. So you are not carrying out the same work, you are looking at it as part of the council's work, essentially, because the working group is undertaking a particular piece of work, looking at cycling in the district. As your scrutiny review, you're looking at what is the council doing. So one of those things, saying, well, actually, let's formally have that group in to see what it's doing. If it's in its infancy, it might be a little bit premature, but certainly looking at its terms of reference and what its aims and achievements are programmed for. So you're working you're overseeing what they're doing in terms of what is the organisation doing to address issues around cycling in the district. So being a member of that group, Mrs. Pell, you will come to this committee with a certain amount of knowledge. So if there's a question around or what policies are being developed, this is where we have the benefit of your twin hat, where you say, well, actually, the group is looking at this. Therefore, would it be a good idea, as part of our evidence gathering, that we get a representative of that group to come in and to give an explanation on that piece of work? So we use the knowledge that each of you have as members, how you sort of work with the different roles and responsibilities as being a member, to bring knowledge to this scrutiny review. And then it's how we then use that knowledge to undertake that review. So you're not relying on officers saying, oh, actually, we think there's this going on, so we suggest you do this. So it's a string to your bow, essentially, Mrs. Pell, has been part of this scrutiny committee, that you've got knowledge of these working groups, what they're doing, and sort of make suggestions and have an insight into the work of those groups as well.
If I can come back and say to you, the strategy group that's meeting, it's made up of Braintree District Council officers and councillors, Essex County Council officers and councillors, and some people from the cycling world who are and we are forming our strategy, and I think it's got to be done, formulated by our March
so this
meeting, or if not the special one, but it's coming, so it's working at a tidy pace, but Frankie is the chairman.
Yeah, so that's probably our next step of when we're going to ask you what do you want us to start coordinating to bring you your witnesses, essentially. So having a knowledge of how that group is working is quite useful to know what resources we can start bringing in. So it will always be a bonus that you've got that knowledge, Mrs. Pell. So I know you're going to have to sort of be not necessarily careful, but sort of what, you know, when you're speaking, you're being clear that you've got the hat on as the scrutiny member here.
Yeah.
So I'm appreciating that you've got relationships with your working group, but equally you've got that knowledge to be able to help and inform this scrutiny review into examining that topic.
Right.
So I hope that answers your question. Sorry for waffling.
That's okay, thank you.
So are members happy with the terms of reference as they're set out in the report? We officers believe that gives you a lot of scope to start examining this topic and to start looking at the resources, etc. the organisation has in dealing with this subject matter of walking and cycling. I touched upon the work of the climate change group, and obviously we've got the cycling strategy group as well, which we would look at as a potential resource for the scrutiny review to look at. In terms of timescale, you can see from the report that we've got a very short window of February through to April this year. Now, that is just to reflect on the scrutiny timetable for this year, but we are not asking you to conduct this scrutiny review in that 3-month window of opportunity. It will take the time it needs to take. So a part of the decision that we're asking for is that you note the current timetable, but this will then go over to the next civic year, and we would anticipate this will probably take you to the autumn. With the way the current timetable is set up, and if we need to have additional meetings to undertake this scrutiny review, then we can start to timetable those in, and we'll liaise with the chairman and the vice chairman on how we go forward with that. So is there any further questions around the timetable and the terms of reference?
No, I don't think so, Emma. I think that's absolutely fine.
Okay. We do have an indication that Councillor Parker wanted to speak, Chairman.
Councillor Parker.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It was just really in question with the second bullet point. So we are asked to address what action has currently been taken by the council, but not asked to comment on it.
No.
What are your views on that?
Well, you comment in it through your scrutiny review. So in looking at this subject, so for example, if I just pick planning policy, because it's documented in terms of reference, if we sort of looked at the planning policies for cycling and walking in the local plan, one of the potential things is that we could have planning policy officers come to a committee meeting to give and to talk about the policies and what they aim to achieve, etc. When we've conducted the scrutiny review, you'll be picking up things that you think, oh, actually, we could probably do that better. So our comments would be through the recommendations we make to the executive. So if you felt that a particular policy area was weak and we've got evidence to demonstrate why you've reached that conclusion, then your comment would be through that recommendation. It is possible, as you saw through the vaccinations scrutiny reviews, that you can examine an area and your comment would be, actually, we don't feel this particular area needs any more further work. So our comment comes through the discovery of evidence, how we evaluate that, and if we see that whether we're achieving or whether there's a shortfall in what we would expect to be delivered on a certain subject area. So that's where our comment comes in, and it's to the executive at the end of the scrutiny review. What we're not here to do ourselves is to fix the problem. This is something that we generally have to mind a lot of scrutiny reviews, because we do hope we give you interesting subjects. And of course, when you start getting to look at the subjects, you start getting invested and you feel actually we should do something about it. But you're doing something about it is identifying the issues and making recommendations. You don't have the power as a group to actually fix the problem. So you are holding the authority to account. You're looking at authority through the lens of the scrutiny review, and then identifying if there are issues and what you think the authority can do to resolve those, if it is within our gift to resolve them, or whether we have to make a recommendation to one of another party, for example, Essex County Council, the Highway Authority, or some other public sector organisation. So that is how we resolve the issues. Is that okay?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. That's very helpful.
So it's a really interesting subject. The government and the council have an ambition to make cycling and walking a natural choice for shorter journeys, and as part of longer journeys too. So let's see what's being done and how we can put forward constructive feedback. So with the first point, what I want to do with you now is probably work out how we're going to structure this. What sort of witnesses we would like to have come forward to give us some evidence, whether we want to look at policies, whether someone's going to go away and look at the Dutch roundabout that's been produced already, because I believe that Essex is going to be potentially the second district to Cambridge is the first. Essex is going to be the second, and I believe that Sheffield is lined up to be the third. So whether we want someone to look at that and see if we have any recommendations that we'd like Cabinet to put to highways. There are so many different avenues that we could take. So we really need to discuss that and hone it in on a few substantial areas. So with the first bullet point, could I open the discussion up to people, please? So what are the perceived barriers of increasing cycling and walking provision for local residents and communities in the district? The limitations? Perhaps look at e-scooters project, although the results of that are not available at the moment. They may well become available during the course of our work. So could I have some thoughts from anybody, please? Councillor Mrs. Pell.
Thank you to be taken over the meeting, but it's just some ideas that the strategy group have been working with some of the people that have been working on this cycleway now that will go from hopefully Halstead to Kelvedon. And there's some good people on there. There's a man called Peter Cohn, that's K-O-H-N. Neil Jones, our officer, has been working on it. So they're people that you could call and ask them about their work they're doing on and how it's going, because they're doing that on our behalf.
Okay. Thank you. What are your thoughts on e-scoot? Oh, Councillor Mrs. Wilson. You're muted, Councillor Mrs. Wilson. Could you unmute? Thank you.
Councillor Pell has just stolen my thunder, I'm afraid. I was going to suggest that we ask Peter Cohn, because he's involved with the Earlscombe to Halstead, which is mostly on private land and a railway line, but also Earlscombe to Coggeshall, which runs through a very generous gentleman who runs an industrial estate, and also Marks Bourne. And then Coggeshall to Kelvedon, which is very commercialised, has a river. And so there's a totally different aspect of all the different areas. And I think he would be a very good person to come and talk to us.
Is he from a particular group? Or?
Yes, he is. I'm going to tell you here. He's from the Earlscombe to Kelvedon Cycle Route Project meeting. But he is the chair of Coggeshall Neighbourhood Plan, and I can send you his email if you like.
Okay.
He's also on the Colchester cycling group as well.
Yeah, I mean, he would have so many different aspects to tell you.
Okay, so Chairman, sorry for interrupting. So certainly with looking at the projects, that would fit nicely under the second bullet point, is what action is currently being undertaken by the council in order to link in with the government's new cycling and walking initiative. I'm presuming that members have seen the gear change document. It's been provided as a hyperlink to you. It's actually a very good document because it covers It was initially brought forward by Councillor Garrett as part of her topic submission because it focused on the health benefits. But it's a nice document because it sets out the health benefits, but then it also then touches upon the infrastructure and some planning aspects. So it's a very high level document, very easy read. They've got some nice, I like it because it's got some illustrations in it that sets out some of the issues around cycling. I mean, there's one little diagram that sort of says, you know, design a road that's, you know, a cycleway that's going to be then used for the, you know, by the intended user. So you've got a nice sort of dog leg cycleway, but then you can see the users have actually gone the shortest distance across from point to point. But it's a nice document to sort of start your thinking. And I think what I'm picking up from the suggestion by Mrs. Pell and Mrs. Wilson, that Mr. Cohn could possibly be a useful witness to look at the current projects the authorities are undertaking, but that then also then touches on the perceived barriers, because you've mentioned cycleways going across certain varieties of land. So we've got land in private ownership, we've got the railways, we've got all those issues. So they are some of the perceived barriers, because obviously the creation of a footway, cycleway, walkway network is about land ownership and getting those people engaged. So certainly that gentleman seems an ideal person to approach to see if they are able to talk to you on their experiences. And also Neil Jones. Neil is a regular officer at Scrutiny. He's come along to give previous explanations around use of 106 monies, planning policies, large development. Neil, to my knowledge, and this is where I look to Councillor Parker and I think it's Mrs. Pell's previously been on planning around you know, sort of the plan applications that Neil has been involved in, because he's done some of the larger developments to my knowledge. So we've got two good things. The other thing you might want to look at is policies that are coming through on the local plan. Now we know we've got local plan going to full council next week, but that doesn't stop you from looking at the policies in the emerging plan. So if you want us to make an approach to planning policy so they can explain some of the policies that we've got within the local plan around cycling and walkways, we can certainly do that.
I think that would be really helpful, actually, Emma. Yes,
because I think
we need to know what the council is doing in terms of its policies.
Okay, so we can certainly do that, and then obviously we've had Councillor Ritchie identified to come forward to give an explanation on the his working group going.
So would it be prudent to have Peter Cohn and Councillor Ritchie if they're involved in the same group, or is that going to be a bit overkill?
Not necessarily. We can probably sort of
have them together, perhaps on a Zoom meeting.
There is that potential for that, and we have had witnesses come back on more than one occasion in the same scrutiny review because they wear several hats. So we can certainly look at that, but I think for the moment it's about identifying we can get those invitations out to start them bringing this forward for you. We've got Councillor Wright who's got a question, Chairman.
Councillor Wright.
Yeah. I mean, Jackie brought up half of my question already, but the other one is the perceived barriers to cycling and walking. I can see that being a lack of dedicated cycleways and walkways away from roads. You know, through new housing estates and new developments, they could have, you know, like a public footpath that used to go through fields. It's got to now carry on and have a dedicated roadway or pathway, cycleway, and the same with the e-scooters.
Yes.
I can see the big problem with the e-scooters is, I believe, I'm losing a bit of my balance as I get older. And the older you get, the less likely you want to get on an e-scooter and start zooming down a public path full of, you've got mobility scooters on there already, you've got push chairs, prams, people walking. You need, for them to work, you need a wider path or a dedicated path for, e-bikes, which I think would be a bit better, and e-scooters. And I think that would be a big minus against people using those sort of things.
So,
I mean, going back in the past, not too far away, me and my wife every other weekend used to say, right, we'll put the car away and we'll use our bikes. We stopped doing that because around this area, it's getting more and more dangerous to get on a bike and cycle around country lanes and even into Whittam. It's getting too busy on roads, too busy on footways. Well, there's no footways around here other than the ones in Whittam. As soon as you get outside the country, most country roads have got no footways, so you can't even use those as a cycleway. And it stops people getting on that bike and doing it.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. I mean, the question is how we gather the information with regards to what are the perceived barriers. I've had a look at some government documents because alongside the gear change document, the government has, and the Department of Transport have looked at barriers to cycling already. So there are some documents there available already. However, I wondered if we could probably put it out to parish councils. Is there time to do that, Emma? Is there, to send out a questionnaire and ask them to participate?
we certainly can do surveys with parishes. A few years ago, we would do those as a paper survey, but now with the progression of our websites, we can set up a online survey and then send that link out to the clerks to get their information. But yes, certainly a survey is a useful scrutiny tool to get views from outside the organisation. Obviously, as you've touched upon, there is a number of documents where research has already been undertaken, so it would be quite valuable for members to familiarise themselves with those documents, and what we can do is circulate those to members, and then you can then start to formulate your views, and obviously with your own local knowledge, but certainly with extending the scrutiny review to autumn, we certainly do have time to undertake that and bring back views. We may also find that there's some other research available through the cycling groups, etc. themselves. So we can certainly sort of look at finding appropriate recipients of a survey for that as well.
Okay. So if we were to put together a very short survey, just a few questions, what are the perceived barriers, obviously, how would could we get that out quite quickly? Is that something we could get out at the beginning?
Potentially. The biggest delay for getting surveys out is agreeing the set of questions for the survey, because obviously, traditionally officers would set a set of questions together, and then we'd bring it back to committee, get them approved, tweak them, and then send them out. So if we can have a set of members who are willing to think about a set of questions that they want to be asked, then we as officers can circulate that to the wider committee outside a meeting, and then pull that survey together, because as officers we can only make assumptions. So if we hear directly from you what you would like your questions to address, we can then have some conversations and to refine that in a quicker timescale.
Okay, I believe Councillor Hensman had wanted to say something, and then Councillor Parker.
Mine is just on the suggestion of looking at the demographics, because obviously the walking and cycling are it's either commuting or leisure or any other method or means of using it, and whether we kind of split it down slightly so that we can look at the perceived barriers, whether it's you have to go because you need to work, or you want to go because it's a bit of leisure and you need your exercise and that sort of thing. And I remember some years ago that there was some cycling maps produced, and I believe they're still available, and whether they could be a starting point, see what we've done in the past, see whether they're still relevant today, and that way you can then get a feel, because you might find a lot of the work's already been done, and rather than reinventing the wheel, it might just be tweaking it somewhat, making it a bit straighter.
That would be a very good idea. I mean, do we have a couple of members who would like to take on that subject to maybe look to see what maps are available for officers would have a record, Essex County Council have a record. Do I have two members who'd like to look at to see what maps are available? No. Councillor Mrs. Weeks.
Yes, I'll look into it for you.
That would be very helpful, and then at least we can just make a starting point there just to see what's out there. That would be great. Councillor Mrs. Parker, you had a question.
Yeah, I think Councillor Hensman's right, really. We need to sort of, I think the starting point must be what sort of journeys can you do on a bike or for walking? And then you break that down to, well, who are the sort of people who will be likely to use use bikes or walking for those journeys? So, I mean, the obvious thing is commuting. So you're talking about probably relatively young people who are using their bikes to go to work. But I think we need to, I think the starting point must be, what sort of journey are you doing? And then moving on from there, because obviously there are a whole lot of journeys where walking and cycling are totally inappropriate. Number one being going to the supermarket, of course. Well, unless of course you live in a town and you have a supermarket 5 minutes around the corner from you, you can just go and do a sort of top up. But there are lots of journeys where cycling, walking is not suitable. So I do think it's quite good to sort of start off by saying what sort of journeys are we talking about. I'm not sure whether we necessarily, I mean, I'm not sure necessarily, do we need evidence of that? I mean, is it not just sort of common sense, and us all would sort of know roughly what sort of journeys would be appropriate to be taken on foot and on bike, and what would not?
I was thinking more along the lines. I was thinking more along the lines of how we can get, why people won't use a bicycle. I mean, I've asked a few questions, and some people have said to me they wouldn't know how to repair a puncture or get the brakes changed. They're too frightened of traffic. They're not familiar with the highway code anymore. I mean, even some adults have said, can we have a cycling proficiency lessons? So there are all sorts of reasons as to why people won't use a bicycle. I think people will walk if it's in a perceived distance that they can cope with. And you're right, Councillor Parker, I think that we probably don't need evidence for that. But what we want to know is why people won't cycle anywhere. I think we assume that it's always about the traffic. I don't think it is. I think sometimes it's about confidence as well. It might be cost. It might be because they've had a bike stolen. What can we do about that? I've recently seen a scheme where a charity is putting photographs of bicycles up there and trying to marry people up with their former owners for bicycles that have been found. So there are all sorts of reasons, I think, as to why people won't cycle. But obviously, yeah, walking is all about the distance that somebody is prepared to take. Councillor Wright, you had a question.
Yeah, about the survey going out. There's a group on BDC where they put out surveys or ask questions. I can't remember what it's exactly called, but I used to be on it about 8 or 9 years ago, and my wife is still on it.
I believe it's the People's Panels. We can work with the comms team to see what established groups that we've already got to put a survey to.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's it.
Councillor Mrs Wilson, is that a new message from yourself?
It is. It's just to tell you that I have a bicycle in my shed, which I haven't ridden for probably 10 years. And with reference to the previous conversations, it is totally down to confidence. I used to bike everywhere with my children, and I just haven't got the confidence to get on a bike and ride along the roads, I'm afraid. And I think that applies to a lot of people of my sort of age.
Okay.
Chairman, if it helps members, although I've given you the link to the gear change document, I think if members have a look at it, I think there's a number of things in there which will sort of prick their thoughts on this scrutiny review, just to make it easy for members to see it, because I've just had a quick scroll through to look at the document further, and one of the parts in there is around how to get people cycling and protect them from cycling, which picks up on some of the points that you've made during this meeting. So about being trained to use a bike properly on a road. So the old-fashioned cycling proficiency test, which I think most people did at school. I certainly can remember doing mine at school and getting my certificate. But I'm not too sure I've got those same skills now as I did when I was at school. But again, it sort of talks about combating bikes can be a very big investment for a family. So people are reluctant to take a bike out knowing there's not actually proper places for bikes to be secured. I mean, as you know, walking around your towns, how many times do you see a bike secured against a railing or you know, some piece of street furniture, which then stops the street furniture being used for the purpose that is designed for. So you know, you've got a pedestrianisation project coming forward with the organisation. You know, you can sort of look at whether, you know, has cycling and been taken into account as a means of transport to get into the pedestrianisation zones. You know, are there bike parks? I mean, those cities which are more designed around cycling, dare I say, you know, sort of Milton Keynes and Cambridge, that, you know, it's not unusual to see a public bike park. You know, there's been, you know, some would argue, well, it's an attraction to those who are more likely to make off with somebody else's bike, but equally for somebody who wants to come into town on their bike, they need somewhere secure to leave there. So that's certainly, you know, a barrier that you know, you could look at is, you know, are these things being incorporated through planning? Certainly from last night, one of the discussions on one of the applications was around bike storage within developments, you know, secure sheds for people in their homes, because not all homes have appropriate storage inside. So there's a couple of avenues that you can, you know, could explore, because some people may say, actually, I don't want a bike because I've got nowhere to store it, I've got nowhere safe to keep it. My employer where I work doesn't have any bike storage facilities. So there's a number of things that you can look at, and we can probably look at those through the lens of planning policy, planning officers, and through the people's panel as a means to try and get an idea of, you know, if you could cycle to work and you don't, why don't you do this? Is it because you don't have the right facilities? So I think that document might sort of just prick some ideas and some thoughts around questions for the survey. So I will circulate that to all members after the meeting, if that helps.
Thank you, Emma. Looking at item 2 with the Dutch roundabout, now there are plans to have one of those in the district. So I wondered if, do you think Cambridge would be very forthcoming if we asked them some questions about the Dutch roundabout? Emma, do you think, is that something you could write to them and ask them how it's been received?
there's no reason why we can't do that. I'm hoping that some of their considerations around the Dutch roundabout would have been on some of their their committee meetings, etc. So there may be some information already in the public domain around that. So that's something we can certainly have a look at. As part of the hyperlinks that we've given you in your report, you've got the link to the County Council's page for the Dutch roundabout.
Yes,
and
the last link, isn't it?
Yes, and the location.
Yes.
Yeah, so the location of that proposed development and the press statement. So we can certainly do some research around that as a concept.
That would be very helpful. I've obtained a newspaper cutting, which is in November 2020, where they'd raised concerns because they felt there was a blind spot on the Dutch roundabout in Cambridge. So it would be really nice to see how it had been received and what problems they'd encountered. And hopefully we could analyse that information.
Yeah, and for those members who've not yet been able to look at that link, the Dutch roundabout style has been considered as a concept to actually increase greater priority to cycling and walking in those areas. So I don't know if members have been able to look at the illustrations within the information we've provided, and there's quite a bit of information on the internet generally about Dutch roundabouts, so you can see what styles they are. So one of the questions you might want to examine is, why is this considered, a means to actually enable, safe, direct networks for cyclists and people walking. I have to admit, my first view of that Dutch roundabout was, I don't think I understand this personally. I'm not sure how I would approach such a scheme, but there must be some thoughts and research on these for the County Council to consider that they are a roundabout that can be installed with this concept in mind. So we can certainly undertake some research into that
Thank you. Yes, I agree with you, Emma, there. My first thoughts were, with the cost involved, would it not have just been sufficient to have an underpass for cyclists and walkers? But obviously it's something we need to look at the rationale behind that. So everyone, we've looked at all 3 bullet points. Is there anything else that you can add? Councillor Mrs. Pell.
I did send a message through the chat on perceived dangers. The routes that they're looking at the moment to go from Howstead, Earls Cone, Coggeshall to Marks Tay to get to the railway station, Kelvedon, that's fine in the summertime. If people are going to go that way to go to work, and it's more direct for them because it will cut quite a few miles off them, but it's what happens in the darker nights for them to come home. Most of that will be unlit. And living where we do, I have deer eating my flowers in the front garden, and you get a deer come out of a hedge at you as you're going on a bike and there's nobody else around. That really is a perceived danger. And the other danger that there is, and I've mentioned this in the other group, is everybody that seems to ride bikes these days have got the lycra on, which is dark, and they don't wear a fluorescent jacket over the top. They drive 2 together. And in some of the lanes that you come through, because of the dark overhanging bushes, you can't see them. That they're their own worst enemy, that there should be something in law or something that they should wear a fluorescent.
Okay, so Chairman, just picking up on that point, because obviously you've got the survey. Some of the points that Councillor Pell has referred to are matters for the highway code, and it comes back down to that question about training of bike users as commuters, not just the leisure use of a bicycle, but being a road user. And again, that's something that's picked up in the gear change document. So a part of the survey, we could put a set of questions in that deals with seasonal use of bikes for commuting to work, etc., and also knowledge of the highway code, because some of the points that Mrs. Pell has raised would be matters which would be picked up through a cycling proficiency test, knowledge of the highway code, you know, whether there's sufficient knowledge, or do we put sufficient information out to inform members of the public that actually when you are cycling on a road, are you aware of your obligations to make sure that the world and its wife can see you whilst you are, you know, cycling along a highway with lorries, cars, pedestrians stepping out in front of you? So that's a question we can probably build into the survey, and also to see what information is out there already about making yourself a safe cyclist.
Yes.
But there's nothing there that most of these tracks that they're going to be doing are going to be going through fields. The farmer is allowing them access over his fields on a track that will be sort of made, which means you probably won't see another soul. That, you know, that you've got no street lights, no nothing. It's just pitch dark.
It is possible through your scrutiny review, at the end of it, you say, actually, it would be a very good idea for this authority to issue its own safe cyclist guide, you know, because it's sort of like, what can the authority do to give information to the public? You know, do we put information on our website? As you know, there's a lot of information on the County Council's website about cycling routes, etc. And Councillor Weeks is going to very kindly sort of look at that for the group. But it may be a simple recommendation to the Cabinet is that after you've conducted all this scrutiny review, one of the fundamental barriers of people being a safe cyclist or cycling on the road is a lack of competence, a lack of knowledge, awareness, and to try to address that, a publication that a safe cycling publication may be pulled together, you know, something simple, because you can't fix the problem of Mr. X deciding not to wear a fluorescent jacket, you know, when he cycles, or to carry a mobile phone, you know, if he's cycling on a remote cycleway or bridleway. But having our own document where the authority has at least said, do you know what, there is a lack of information out there, so this is our approach to start signposting people to being a safe cyclist, taking some responsibility. We've had other scrutiny reviews where we've signposted people to other resources. You know, so we're not looking to reinvent the wheel. We're not looking to take on other responsibilities or asking the executive to take on responsibilities of which are not within the gift of the district council. But we can signpost, and we so it may be one of those things is, after we've done the survey, after we've done some research, to say actually one of the biggest barriers is cyclist awareness. So we would like to attempt to address that by making a recommendation to Cabinet to X, Y, and Z. So as I said to you, you're not here to fix the problem, you're here to identify the issues. Are we doing what we could do to deal with this, or do we need to do more? And if we need to do more or do something new, is this the approach you want to take? And we're making this recommendation on the basis of this evidence. So that could be the outcomes of the survey, information that's already in the public domain, or the lack of information in the public domain. And if we are an authority who is promoting, you know, cycling routes, etc., or the development of a cycling network, then why just provide the cycleway or facilitate the creation of the cycleway? Why do we not go as far then to say, actually, let's be holistic with our approach, provide them with the cycleway or enable the cycleway to create, and let's give them some guidance about being a safe walker, a safe cyclist, a safe user of the rights of way network. So they can be some very simple recommendations to the executive through your evidence gathering, going forward. So again, as I said at the beginning, we're not here to fix the problem. We're here to identify, are we doing enough as the district authority? What we're doing, is it the right thing to do? Are we missing a trick? Do our policies stack up to enable, to encourage walking and cycling in the district? So we will go through this thought process of sort of raising issues and trying to resolve them. But what I'd ask members just bear in mind is we're here to sort of examine what's going on and make recommendations to the executive, which hopefully they'll take forward, and you'll see improvements in your district if there is things not quite right. Is that okay?
Sounds very good. Sounds like a plan, Emma. Thank you. Have you got enough notes there about the way forward or the way we want to go now, Emma? I think probably wrap it up
Okay.
unless there's any other.
So if I can just recap, Chair. So we've got Councillor Weeks, who's going to look at the cycling map resources in the public domain, and she's going to pull together just a précis of what's in the public domain, and I will work with Councillor Weeks to support her through that, and then report that back to the committee. We are going to develop a survey, which we will speak to the Commons group about news, and the People's Panel and the parish councils to get that survey out into the communities to get information. And we'd invite members to have some thinking time about what sort of questions they want to have in the survey, picking up everything from the obvious physical barriers to cycling all the way through to seasonal cycling and personal issues with cycling and restrictions, etc. If members do have any thoughts on those questions, could I ask, with your permission, Chair, that by the end of the month, if members could submit some
Yes, so email you by the end of the month, I think, with questions. That would be
so we can start to formulate that in the background and speak to our comms colleagues about who we can use for that. Yes, so members put forward their questions. We're also going to have undertake some research into the background to Ducks Roundabouts, trying to make contact with colleagues at the Cambridge Authority, so we can give members some more informed background, and we will start to work up a programme where we will look at inviting the officers identified through our discussion, including Mr. Cohen, to come into meetings to give some evidence around the terms of reference, so the perceived barriers, what work is currently being undertaken, and where they see particular issues. So that's
so that would be the local plan, and also Councillor Ricky as well.
Yes, so we'll work up a programme with you, Chair, on the timetable of meetings, see how we can fit that in.
Okay.
And also we do have officers within planning. I will make an approach to Neil Jones. This has been identified, and because he's familiar with the work of the Scrutiny Committee, hope that he can come forward, as he's been cited as an excellent officer who's supported scrutiny reviews previously. Also then talk to the local plan team to see if they've got an officer to come forward to talk about the emerging policies in the local plan around cycling, etc. So members have a clear understanding around what the existing policies are. And I think that's
pedestrianisation. We didn't.
Yes, yeah. So to make approach to the team responsible for pedestrianisation about the use of cycling and walking in those concepts as well.
I think Councillor Parker wanted to say something. Then was Councillor Parker.
Yes. Thanks. Yeah, no, I think it's a good idea to think about how the pedestrianisation is going to relate to cycling, particularly sort of cycling across Braintree town centre. But I was just thinking about timing, because in relation to section 2 of the local plan, because the expectation is that that will go for examination in July. So there's really a very, very tight time scale. So if we wanted to influence planning policies in the new local plan, we'd really need to have that evidence gathering sort of as a priority, and somehow try to squeeze our recommendations in before the local plan goes to examination. Otherwise, it's going to be far too late.
Well, the thing with the local plan, you as a scrutiny committee wouldn't be making recommendations to the local plan process. Obviously, as individual members, obviously you have that means to talk. But I think what is important to understand is what is in the local plan coming forward, so we know what policies are in place. But yes, I take on board what you're saying in terms of the timing. I think with the local plan, because of it is what it is, and it takes such a long period of time to go through all the processes for that. There's never going to be quite a right time to sort of be able to influence new policies. But I think it's to get that knowledge to understand where we have got policies, how they're used, and if there is something that we really need to look at, is then make that recommendation to the executive around the local, around planning, a particular planning policy, or if you see a deficiency in the planning policy, because obviously the local plan, there is, I mean, Councillor Parker, obviously your knowledge on this subject is greater than mine, but we have a local plan for a period of time, and then we start working on the next policy. So we will speak to the appropriate officers to see. And one of those is to get that knowledge as well, because it's to make sure, first of all, that all the committee have an understanding of policy, policies in the local plan that deal with cycling and walking, and then to talk about going forward. I mean, when we looked at the scrutiny review into leisure provision, where we had somebody come along, there was the issue about the use of employment sites and for leisure. So we were slightly out of sync with that, but we were still able to examine it through the scrutiny process anyway, even though we knew we were out of sync with the local plan consultation periods, etc.
Councillor Parker, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, and I just want to come out on that, because I mean, once those local plan policies have been adopted, it's very difficult to change them.
Mm-hmm.
And so really our window of opportunity is now, before it goes to, because these policies were originally drafted probably in 2014. They are going to be quite, some of them are definitely out of date already, and need to be revised before they go to examination. And I just think that if we're not careful, we're going to miss our opportunity, because there's going to be, at some point, those policies are going to be looked at again before it goes to examination. So if we were to leave it, say, to October, we will have missed our, there would be no point doing the review, because the policies will have already been adopted, and you'll have to wait for another 15 years.
I understand what Councillor Parker is saying, but this is a scrutiny review, not on the local plan. This is a scrutiny review on the whole of cycling and walking, and planning policy is an element of that. But what needs to be understood is what planning policies are in place, because unless you sit on the local plan subcommittee or on a planning committee, members' knowledge of policies around cycling and walking are not as advanced as those members. So part of it is to understand what policies we currently have in place. Is there any issues with those policies? Like you say, Councillor Parker, some of those are, they were drafted a number of years ago, but this is not a review into the local plan and its process and to make recommendations. But I do understand where you're coming from, Councillor Parker, particularly as how long it takes to go through the local plan process, but there's still value in having those officers come before this scrutiny committee to explain to members what policies we've had and where change can be implemented through the appropriate processes.
I completely understand that, Emma. I mean, all I'm saying is, in terms of, we do need to have an officer come to tell us what the local plan policies are. I mean, obviously we can try and find them ourselves, and to explain whether there are any plans to amend them and so on. But it's just a question of timing, because we just need to, if we want to make some recommendations that those policies that are in the draft local plan should be amended, then that really needs to be done before that goes to examination. That's the only point I'm trying to make.
No, and I do understand that, but it's something that we have to accept, that we are always going to be out of kilter with the local plan process. So if there is anything that fundamentally comes up in the scrutiny review around policies, then I will then essentially I'll take that away and to see how we can then feed that into the process. So there's not a lost opportunity, but just that is one element of the scrutiny review into cycling and walking. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So the only other thing that I've picked up here is the e-scooter project. So I think we've got to let them get a little bit further along before we look at that. But Councillor Hensman?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You've missed Councillor Walters, and also I'd like to come back on the education before you moved on. So if I'll just carry on, and then if that's all right, Mrs. Walters. With regards to the education on cycling, it's where the old cycling proficiency disappeared, and it's gone through various guises, and it's now the Department for Transport's bikeability. I've put in our area, and there isn't anything, but it's down to local authorities to actually deliver that, believe it or not. Yeah. So whether it's worth looking at that, because the number of cyclists that ride on the pavement that shouldn't, the number of cyclists that jump red lights, those, the highway code, as Mrs. Bisbee quite rightly pointed out, still applies to them. So it's a bit more education, and wondered whether the police might be an angle to bring in as well. But equally, cyclists, going back to Mrs. Pell's point of the dangers, and would you feel safe? Because I've had close passes when I've been on my bike, because the cars have just cut in because they've tried to overtake me with an oncoming car, that sort of thing. And it's just a case of expanding on the education.
So Chairman, we could add a question to the survey, as Councillor Hensman has identified through his own piece of quick research, that the bikeability scheme is down to local authority to deliver. So one of the questions we could put in the survey is that if the authority offered a bikeability scheme, would you likely to take it up? Because obviously there's always cost to this sort of training. There's the investment in making sure that people are appropriately trained to then deliver the training. So that's a question that we could put into the survey, to say that if this scheme was offered by the district council or the relevant local authority, would you likely to take it up? And what would be the barriers to you taking it up? Because it may be that there's a perceived that there would have to be a fee charge. Obviously, that's something that we'd look at through maybe doing some quick research into the bikeability schemes, see who else offers it, whether it's something that can be signposted. But that's a question that we can pick up in the survey to get a initial feel as to would it be something that would be taken up by our residents.
Yes, that's a good idea. Thank you, Emma. Thank you very much. Councillor Mrs. Walters.
Hello there.
Hello.
I just wanted to say, I used to cycle. I'm going back a little bit now from this conversation we've been having. I used to cycle to Whittam to go to work. And I tell you what, it was like death on wheels. The traffic just had no regard for any cyclists whatsoever. I tried to go down the main B1018, which is a bit precarious to say the least. And then I decided for safety's sake, for my own safety, I would go via Silver End and that way. And it was even just as badly dangerous and scary as any other route. I mean, it was just almost not worth cycling because it was too treacherous.
Yeah.
I raised this issue many years ago, and I'm talking about when Councillor Mrs. Newton, Councillor Lady Newton, was on the Emma. You remember her? When she was there, I asked her about this. How many years ago is this? About 5, 6, 7 years. I asked her then about having cycle paths for people who wanted to ride. I wanted to ride my bike and be healthy, but it became too treacherous. And she said, no, it's very unlikely we're going to get them.
Yeah.
So here we are now talking about it all.
We are, yes, and it's good. The government are backing this, and they are prepared to put some fairly hefty funds behind it. So
Good.
hoping that the work we do will be useful.
Well, I hope it is, because I think it's valuable. I no longer have a bike. I donated it to a family, and they all go out together now. They have a lovely time, which I'm really thrilled about.
That's lovely.
But it is important. But the e-scooters, these little new scooters things, I think they're quite dangerous personally, because they go very, very quickly. And if you can't hear what's going on, I'm going to admit this, I'm actually partially deaf. And if I don't have my hearing aids in, I can't hear what's coming up behind me. So, and they move so fast, and there has to be rules and regulations on how they behave. And to have them going through the centre of Braintree when we have got a pedestrian area there, all bikes, anything on 2 wheels, I think is going to be very dangerous for pedestrians.
Well, they're not legal yet. That's the first thing. So it is exploratory. But I was very fortunate to go to Vienna a few years ago, and they were very, very active in Vienna. And they had their own site, they had their own route, their own area, and people were whizzing about on them. And I didn't really find it a problem because they had their own space. So I think it just depends on how it's set out and how they're used. And I believe they've also put some in Cambridge now, which are available for use. So it'll be interesting to see how it develops, what problems arise.
Yes.
And just let them make all the mistakes before we go forward with it. If we do indeed go forward with it.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution. Now, I think we've had a fairly good session discussing the terms of reference. So I will finally ask, is there anything else that anybody would like to add about the terms of reference that the 3 terms of reference discussed, set out on page 10? No? Are we finished with that? Okay. Right, members. So we've been asked to consider the steps which we wish to take next in order to commence our scrutiny review and to agree any additional meeting dates. I believe you've put forward all the suggestions you need. So, members, we're asked to formally agree. So number 1, to agree the terms of reference for the scrutiny review into cycling walking in the Braintree district, and to note the future work programme for 2021-22 as set out in the report. In terms of the steps we wish to take next to commence the scrutiny review, we ask officers to progress the suggestions received today and to report back to myself and the Vice Chairman. This feedback will then be shared with the rest of the committee in due course. Now, I will take silence as assent that members are in agreement. Silence. Thank you, members. The recommendations have been agreed. So, members, this concludes our business for this evening. So I will close this meeting of the Community Development Group at 20:32. And thank you, members, for your attendance this evening, and to those watching the broadcast via the Council's YouTube channel. I will now hand back over to the meeting facilitator.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Before I ask the webcaster to terminate the broadcast, I would like to remind you that the Council will retain performance data relating to your connection to the meeting in the event of a legal challenge to this new way of holding meetings. Can the webcaster please confirm that the broadcast has ceased?